Hello everybody. Time for another edition of ZBEST DIY camera restoration and repair tips, videos, and do-it-yourself methods to work on and fix vintage and older cameras to restore them and get them back to use again. Today we've got a Canon FT. This is a camera from the 1970s. Really nice cameras, and you can pick these up for some pretty good values, you know, on eBay or Etsy, or one of the other sites, ClickPick, so on and so forth. This one came in, it's in pretty good shape, and the only issue that it was having was that as we look inside the viewfinder, it's got some deterioration marks from the top portion. There's foam lining in here that sometimes gets on the prism, and you have marks on there. And I'm trying to get this into position for you so that you can see the marks that we're going to be attempting to clean today. Those are foam marks from the cushioning foam inside the prism, and sometimes it rubs off and gets on the prism glass, and although it doesn't take away from actually using the camera, it's kind of neat if we can clean that off and make it crystal clear like it originally was, if possible. And with the Canon cameras and others that have removable, tops or areas that you can work on, the Minolta series, Pentax, so on and so forth, a lot of the SLRs, you can take the tops off and clean those marks up. So I was trying to show you today what that looks like, and we'll get right to it here. Just wanted to give you a little show of what the viewfinder looked like and what we're trying to accomplish. So what we need to do is remove the top cover. I'm going to remove this so that you can see, what the inside looks like. Pretty straightforward, typical SLR layout from the 1960s and 70s and going into the 80s. You have a reflective mirror there that goes up and down during the time of exposure, the bayonet or screw mounts or that type of thing to attach the lens there on the camera. So I'm going to put this back on. This is the original Canon body cap, and typically what we want to do is we want to loosen up the rewind mechanism. We want to take off the winding arm. We want to remove 1, 2, 3, 4. In this particular camera, it has 4 screws. Sometimes there's one over here, but Canon has placed the batteries here, so or the battery holder, so that's not needed. But these elements are these screws, rather, they hold on the top case, along with when the winder is on the camera, keeps the top snug. These are pretty straightforward. We do have to take off the unit, the shutter speed and ISO dial, or in that day it was actually ASA. ASA and ISO are ratings on film, which are similar numbers, just different initials. And then we take off the winding arm as well. It's important to note, to make the reassembly a little more straightforward, you want to put the dial on 1000, and in this particular case you want to reduce that to the lowest ISO, which is 25 on this model. So by placing it on 1000, fastest shutter speed, and the lowest ISO, you put the dial into the position so that you can put it back on more readily, and there's not a spring tension underneath when you remove this. So we'll we'll go ahead and get to that in just the next next minute or so. And just wanted to give you a little overview of what we're trying to accomplish there with this Canon FT. Okay, everybody, what we're going to do now is we're going to start actually removing the screws and all the components so that we can get to the top. You will need a cross-point screwdriver if possible for the JIS or Japan Industrial Standard screws that the Japanese SLRs utilized. The difference is you have a deeper neck on these so that they go into the screws and grab a hold a little bit different. They're just a little bit different than the American Standard screws, but and you can use an American Standard if they're loose enough to do that, but sometimes these screws get a little bit snug, and so that you don't mar the screwdrivers or the screw heads, it's a good idea to maybe invest in a couple of these, and then also a small spanner. These are adjustable. I've already had these pre-adjusted for your convenience there. And what this is for is when we take off the holding cap for the winding arm right here, and then also the shutter speed and ISO dials that, as you can see, they just go right into those holes right there, and then we loosen that up. So also, as you're removing these screws and all the components, is a good idea. You know, what some guys do is that they will lay things out around the camera as they're removing it so that everything goes back in order for organization. And what you can also do is some folks have told me that they also lay down like maybe double stick tape, and then they put the screws right on the double stick tape so that they don't move around while you're working on this. Anything to make it easier when we put everything back together is always helpful. So today what I'm going to be doing is just laying the screws out just around here initially as we get to the top portion. Also, you want to make sure that you keep an eye on as you remove this particular dial. You want to make sure that you keep everything in order. You don't turn anything when you're working on or when the cap is off to change this, because it's synchronized to this setup currently, and it makes everything that much more more easier when you reassemble. A lot of times it's not so much the disassembly of something, but it's the reassembly to put things back in order where it sometimes becomes a little more challenging. And it's easier if you keep everything in order, if possible. So what I'm going to do is release the bottom here. And this particular camera has the release on the bottom. A lot of times when you pull the top rewind knob off, this pops up, but on this particular model of Canon, they have a locking mechanism down below here, and so we'll open it up via the doorway hatch there. This particular model, this is the QL, and that's what just a little side note, what the QL stands for when we're working on this particular model. It stands for quick load, and Canon had produced, this was kind of state of the art at the time, for quick loading, is that this particular door would come down, or this flap would come down right on the film, and as the diagram says, it keeps it right into position. Very genius when they came up with this. Pretty simple and straightforward, but does a great job, and you even get an extra frame of film out of that because you don't have to wind so much forward. You just put it right down here, close the door, and go to the first frame. So in any event, we're going to use the screwdriver. You can use anything, screwdriver or wrenches, anything that will go into the forks here. that we can loosen these up. And if you just put this right in there, and then you turn the rewind knob in the counterclockwise direction, and turn it off like that. Sometimes they're a little bit harder, sometimes to get off, sometimes they're easy. And then what we do is we take off the mechanism from the top, and as you can see, as we remove this here, it comes right off. So I'm going to set this aside right here, you know, as in position for the top to be removed. I'm going to close this door partially, and it's always a good idea to keep these caps on, but you know, that's something that I do just so that you don't get anything stuck in there, or a screwdriver, or a screw rather, it goes in by accident, or you know, anything for that matter. It's always a good idea to keep these things in there because you know, if something's going to happen, you know, it will, and you don't want anything falling in and, you know, marring the surface of the mirror mechanism inside, or trying to keep it as clean as possible. So what I'm going to do here is take off the front, and this is a different screw on the front portion of the Canon FT-QL, and I'm going to put that particular screw here, indicating the front of the camera as we disassemble this. I'm going to take the next two screws off here, and these come off. I am using a magnetized tip on the JIS Japan Industrial Standard cross-point screwdriver. And I'm going to put that here. It makes it a little bit easier. It's not mandatory, but if it helps, why not? So you don't lose these parts. We can put these here, and it's always a good idea to try to put them back into the same hole that they came out of. Not a big thing, but you know, sometimes after, you know, 30, 40, 50 years of these being, you know, in there, and perhaps they've been disassembled a few times, they kind of have a similar groove, if you will, you know, into their original holes that they come out of. So that's kind of a little tip that I do. You don't have to, you know, the screws do fit in the other holes, but I just put everybody back where they, you know, where they originally came from, and makes things a little bit easier. So now you've got the 4 screws that are taken out, and I'm gonna put this back into position so that the camera can lay flat, and I'm going to remove the rewind, the film advance rather, with the tool here, if I can think a little bit. The spanner wrench, and they go right into these holes right here, and you position them in that way. Really nice tool to have. You can make a tool like this, you know, out of some needle nose pliers if you want to grind them down. If you got a, you know, a grinder in the workshop, or if you can have a friend with a shop do that. So these go in here. Be very careful. What some guys do is that they will put down a piece of tape before they utilize this tool, so that you don't scrape that. So that's something that you want to be careful of, especially if they're very snug. But this one seems to be, you know, a little bit easier to get off. So I'm going to start this up here, and I'm going to turn this to get that going for us. And once it's loosened, it will typically come right off. And I'll show you another tool that makes things nice, and it's the this Needlepoint tool to turn this, and it makes it a little bit easier. If you like, you can use your thumb. A lot of people use different tools for, you know, for different purposes. So it's also a good idea if we keep these in order. it's always a good idea to, put everything back in the order, that you disassembled that. And as you can see, it's got a couple of little grooves there. These attachment points, they do have two nubs there that go back into these holes. So that's something that you want to keep a close eye on. We'll put this here, so that is assembled as we come back here. On some cameras, you have an additional removal circular nut that needs to be taken off, and on this particular one, you've also got a screw or an attachment point there that needs to be removed, and I'll get the tool for that so that we can take care of that. Okay, hello everybody. We're right about at the point we're going to take the top off of the Canon FTQL. We've already removed most of the hardware, keeping it in order with this set of tools. And just wanted to make mention that sometimes I'm asked if these particular tiny little set screws need to be removed when you take the top off, and you do not. This is just to keep this attachment point on the shaft here. I don't know if you can see that, but they're very tiny. And if you wish to take them off just to explore and see what they're all about, you use a tiny screwdriver like this, a jeweler screwdriver, but it's not necessary. I do want to mention that we need to take off the battery cover to remove the top as well. And this comes right off, and we can keep this right over here as well. So these tops on the Canons, they sometimes will come off very easily. Sometimes, it's a little bit more difficult depending on, the life that they've seen. So this particular one seems to be a little bit loose, just kind of a normal application, and we just need to wiggle those off just like that, and you can see that this is coming off very easily for the most part, which will kind of share with us what our whole purpose is as we take the top cover off. Just wiggle that off, nicely machined, and just wanted to share with you and kind of show you what's on the inside. Now I'm going to be keeping this over here. Now I would like to mention also that this particular camera, they sometimes will have wires that are connected from the top to the camera itself. If that's the case, you have to desolder or remove those, remove the wires, desolder, and take those off. This particular one does not have any attachments, so we can set this over with the other parts right here, and then you can examine what that looks like with the top removed. Gives you a good opportunity to kind of see and discover what a piece of engineering these particular cameras are, along with the single lens reflex cameras from that time period, from the 60s, 70s, and 80s. You can kind of see there's quite a bit of engineering that goes into these beautiful pieces of equipment that give us the images, and still working today. What we're going to be trying to accomplish is removing this particular one and then getting underneath to this to clean out the prism, which actually sits actually right under this covering. You don't want to be moving anything out of synchronization, or touching as little as possible. It always helps to, when you put things back together, if nothing has been moved, as little as possible. The cocking racks right here, or actually the movement racks, knob racks, that type of thing. many times, you know, this point gets worn off here, but the Canons are built very nicely. This is your ring that it advances or tells you about the exposures that you have remaining. So it's just really amazing just to, you know, look inside and see how the cameras are made. So we're gonna go back to this just in a second when we come back, and we're going to remove the top portion. Okay, hello everybody. We're now at the point where we're going to remove the piece that we're interested in cleaning, and there's two cross point screws here on the Canon FTQL. The interiors are very similar to the FTQL, the FTB, the TX, and a number of other similar Canon body styles from that time period. So you'll be seeing the same similar interior as you see here for the most part. They could be a little bit different. Sometimes, you know, if they have designed them for different markets for some reason, they are different at times, and you got to be wary of that. But for the most part, it'll be very similar to what we're working on today. We'll take our JIS cross point screwdriver, and we will carefully just place this here to kind of break that screw. Get that going for ourselves here. Sometimes it's a little bit squirrely working with these. We do have the screw off, and you got to remember that this is under tension, so you may want to kind of keep your finger on the iron device, spring actually, the spring device, so that we can remove that, and then we can loosen up the opposite end here. Sometimes you gotta kind of get in and take a look at it a little bit closely to see what's happening there. And I'm going to take this off, and let's see. Oh, there we go. We have it disconnected. I'm going to put this screw here, and then I'm going to be taking this plastic piece straight off. You got to be careful with the other screw that's here, and we're going to put this aside. You can remove the other screw over here, or take it off while you're unscrewing it on this side. So basically, that's just a cover to protect the another engineered piece to protect the prism on the Canon. And now that we have that off, we can take a white piece of cloth and just remove that, and there we have the prism that we're going to be cleaning up, just to kind of get rid of the little odds and ends that are there. This is a lens cloth that you can use a soft lens cloth, lens tissues, and just kind of clean that up a little bit. Then we're going to put this aside over here, and now we have that taken apart. This is the inner workings, or the top portion. You don't want to be touching this. You've also got to be where there's a fine, this is where the meter needles resides here. And this little guy is right here, very delicate, and you want to be very careful when you're working in this area. This is a good opportunity to take, say for instance, a Q-tip. These are optical grade Q-tips that I get a hold of, and you can clean this area of the viewfinder, kind of get the dust off if you like, being careful not to touch this mechanism here, because you could get that out of sync, and then when you put it all back together it might be a little bit more challenging for you. What is a good idea to do is put a dot with a pen. This happens to be a Sharpie silver metallic for contrast. And I'll put a dot here, and then I'll put a dot also down below, and this way this is matched up just in case you move that by accident, and then you can put a dot here with this piece going across the top and one right below it. This way, just in case if you move anything or it moves you know, by accident, sometimes, as things sometimes do, you can put it back together a little bit more readily. It's nice to kind of clean the inside of the glass piece here for the viewfinder while you're at it. You can also clean with your Q-tip, kind of get in there lightly, don't press too hard, get that dust out of there while you're here, although you can do that afterwards. I clean that, and I clean that up just, you know, while I'm all here, you know, in this area when it's disassembled. So that seems pretty good. And then you can also clean the glass here if you like. Give it a light dusting, just lightly touched. This seems pretty clear, which most of the time they are, because it's, you know, it's all closed up inside. But you just never know where it's been or what the life it's had. So you can clean that up a little bit. I can take the cover off, and you can kind of see that it how the reflective mirror down below kind of shines through. It's kind of an interesting thing. And we'll put the lens cap back on. This looks like this has been cleaned up to our liking. Being careful as you handle this. You might want to take a peek through here, make sure there's no dust. The other thing that I do sometimes is I'll give it a light shot of dusting spray, very lightly. You got to be careful, you've got parts all over, so be careful where you put your pointer, and just lightly spray right inside here. That gets rid of a little bit of dust. We're going to go back to the other side, and carefully, you don't want to be dusting any of these other areas. If possible, just give it a slight dusting just to get that last amount of dust out of there if possible, and that's good there. Not too much, and be very careful, because that air can blast all these screws that you have set up and aligned for your reassembly, which we're going to do next. We've accomplished the cleaning of the prism, which takes off all the particles that have accumulated. Sometimes there's lens fungus that will get on these prisms on the bottom, and kind of clean, get things a little bit murky. But in this case, it just took a little bit of cleaning there. You can also take your lens cloth if you want to, and just lightly get in there, although it's usually not necessary. Those areas are usually pretty clean. It's just the dust that you want to get out of there. And so we're ready to put the prism back on, and we'll do that in the next phase. Thank you. Okay, we're going to get back to assembling the top portion. We've cleaned up the refuse that's on the bottom of that, and it's always a good idea to touch the prisms and things like that with a soft cloth, or if some guys wear gloves while they're doing this, number of different approaches. It's good just to make sure that your hands are clean while you're working on this. Got to make sure that the back faces that area here, the viewfinder, and it just drops right in. Got to make sure it's seated properly. It's right inside. What I do is I double check by taking the cap off and then looking through to make sure you can see the viewfinder correctly. In this case, it's set up ready for reassembly. So we're ready to do the return trip, as I call it. Whenever I work on a camera, I call it a round trip, going from A to Z on the cleanup, or CLA, whatever you're trying to accomplish. And then if everything is in order, we put the cap back on. It's always a good idea to perhaps hit this as well with a little bit of air. Clean this up, take a final check, make sure everything is in order, the prism is sitting correctly, and we're going to get our tiny screws. You got to be careful with these, and it's nice to have a magnetized screwdriver to kind of help you with the the reassembly. So we're going to put this right back in this particular hole here. Make sure that seats properly. That seems like it's seating well right there. And got to make sure that this is tucked in when you reassemble this, that this unit is tucked in, or else you won't be able to put the cover back on. And give it just a little thumb check there to make sure everything is in place. Got to make sure your marks are set, and then we take our second screw, and we're going to get this ready to go. Put this on here, and we're going to put that right into the slot where it belongs, and then we're going to give it a little turn there, and hopefully this will go right in. And we'll give this one a secondary snugging up a bit so it doesn't loosen up. What I like to do at this point is also double check that everything is in place. You can see that this is tucked in behind here. Give this a secondary look inside. I wanted to show you what the nice clean viewfinder looked like after we got done with the recent cleaning. Looks pretty good. To make sure that everything is in place, and we can make sure that before we go any further or put the lid back on, or the top portion, that everything is in place. So now all we have to do is put the cover back on, and I typically give this a little blast of air. Be careful with the screws here. You don't want to blast these with air, but it's always nice just to kind of hit this. And on some cameras you may want to clean up these areas. They get dusty. Now is a good time to do that, so that you can have a really nice, clean, tight camera when you put it all back together. So let's see how this is going to go back on. Always check to make sure that your settings are right back where they were, and it'll make it that much easier for reassembly. So these typically the tops will go back on normally. You have to make sure that all the points are set up correctly. Got to take a look all the way around on your camera to make sure nothing is rubbing incorrectly. And if I can get this set up right. Let's see back here. You always want to take a look back here and make sure this is going in. Kind of have to wiggle that around a little bit to make sure that it's getting seated properly. There we go. Just takes a little bit of wiggling around there just to make sure everything sits and sits right. And you got to make sure everything is just the way it should be right there. So so we're good on that, and we're going to start putting the screws back in and kind of finishing our reassembly project. Okay, we're back to finish the reassembly of the Canon FTQL. We cleaned up the prism, and we're going to start putting the screws back in. We'll put these two screws in first. Got to make sure that everything is snugged up, and as you reassemble everything, make sure that you keep things clean and tidy. Make sure that during the reassembly you put the screws back into the similar locations that they came out of, and then the one screw that goes in the front, this is the different one than the other three, and put that one in here. You don't want to over tighten them so that you know, you strip out the the screws and all. And then we'll put this one in here. Sometimes we have to kind of align them a little bit. Make sure they go into the right slot. I'm going to take a peek at this for a second. So now we're going to complete the assembly, and we have the button up on top. It's all set, ready to tighten down. And I always give it a feel to make sure that while I'm holding it without the attachment screw, that that everything is okay. So what we're going to do is this has the brass washer that goes there, and then we're going to put the attachment screw that we removed, and you can always start these. Hold the knob while you're doing that, and you can give them a little start either with your finger or thumb, kind of get them going a little bit. Make sure it's seated properly. You don't want to cross thread anything, and then we'll tighten it up with the tool here. Just give it a little snug. You don't want to go. You want to make sure you hold on to the shutter dial while you're doing this. Give it a little turn there, and everything is back in order again. You want to give it a try there, and everything is working. It's back to spec. Now our last item that we're going to be putting in is going to be the film advance, and as you may recall, this was This was taken off in this position. We're going to put that back on there. Square that up right there where that should be. And as you may recall, this had the knob here underneath. There's a little knob that sticks out there, so we want to make sure that goes on in this slot right here on the rewind or the winding assembly. I always hold that a little bit right there to make sure that that attaches, and it seems like it's doing its job, which is perfect there. And then we put the attachment screw. Make sure this goes correctly into that slot there, and you kind of put this on just finger tight to begin with until you use the tool to snug that up. You don't want to cross thread these either. That seems pretty good there. Give it another finger tightening. All this is working correctly, and we want to adjust this to fit into these two slots, and you know, remembering not to scratch or do any damage to the screw itself, and just give it a little twist. And you're all set. And it has been completed. We've gone through the full assembly and reassembly of the Canon FTQL to clean the prism, and we're good to go. And that's another completed ZBEST DIY camera and restoration video. Thanks for watching. Subscribe if you like it, or leave some comments. That's ZBEST, Z like zebra, BEST DIY camera, vintage camera repair and restoration.